the winter, folks. I just got back from Maryland. I had 4 presentations there. We did a workshop. No Hotel in the Plains. I did 4 presentations, and the week before that, we were traveling around Ohio. I was talking for Byron Seeds. Now, I do have to apologize here a little bit this morning. My computer is going on the blink. I'm actually going to send it in, but I had to redo some things, so missing out. I thought it all saved, but apparently the power's just going out. So we're going to talk today a little bit about cover crop benefits, the good, the bad, the ugly, but mainly the benefits, because there are a lot of benefits. You just have to be a little bit patient with them, okay? And we'll go through some of these things, but first we're going to start off with this is the information that was missing, and I just redid it here in the last couple minutes. But I wrote an article about this in the newspaper. Alan Sundermeyer, he's retired from Wood County Extension. He's now the new director for CAP, which is the Conservation Action Program. And what he did this last fall is he went to 3 different farms and looked at what their cover crop residue, collected that, and had it analyzed. And here's what they found out. He has sandy loam type soil. This one was planted a little bit earlier. Had a lot of legumes in it, so it has a little bit more value from the nitrogen standpoint. Got 1.4 tons of biomass this fall. They're going to collect it in the spring. Had 1,200 pounds of carbon, which we can put a value on carbon. It's about, I don't know, I think you put a value of about $20 a ton on that. And it had a C/N ratio of about 20. Okay, so we got the nutrients up there. And, it has some nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium. And if you put a value on that for fertilizer, it's about $105 per acre. You have to remember not all of that is going to be plant available. That's what the next assumptions are. Or about $75 per ton. Now, overall, when you add up all the different assumptions, it comes out to about half, about 0.52. So what's the value of that? New values were $55 an acre. Right now, that would be plant available about $39 a ton. So it's not insignificant, but it doesn't always turn out that way. Here's 2 other farms and quite a bit less. And I'll just go to the bottom line here. The value of that mixture in Fulton County, 6.6 tons, 500 pounds of carbon, was $44. If you take 0.52 times that, it's about $23 an acre, or $73 full value of that crop residue. If you reduce that by 0.52, that's $38. Okay. The next one, that one seemed to have a little bit more grasses, didn't have very many legumes in it, so it just didn't have as much nitrogen. Okay. Or other things in it. The other one got planted quite a bit later, only had 350 pounds of carbon in it. What was the value of that? 40. Reduce that down to $21 per acre. It had $100 per ton for the crop residue, so that's about 52. Got to remember though, these will be recollected in the spring, so we'll see what else might turn up. If you want more information, you can go to capohio.org. I will tell you, I've redone some of Alan's numbers. He had great data. I'm not sure his math was quite the best, so I questioned some of it a little bit. I'm not sure who helped him put that all together, but the numbers as far as the testing was pretty good. Well, we're going to talk about all the cover crops and what the benefits are, but we probably first ought to start with what the challenges are. And I actually just got done this morning. As I said, my computer's going on the blink. I thought I'd better get my news article out for Monday. So I just got done writing about all these things here this morning before I came. What's the problem? It costs money. It costs money for the seed. It costs money to plant it. It costs money to terminate it. It's not easy. It takes a lot of knowledge. It takes a lot of experience. And if you're a new farmer or even an older farmer, do you really want all that risk? Okay, so it is risky. You got to learn how to manage a whole completely new system. It's difficult to get the cover crops planted a lot of times after harvest. Okay, you need different farm equipment. You might need no-till equipment. You might need a spreader. You might need a different type of seeder. All right, to get some of these cover crops out. Cover crop crops can sometimes stunt the growth. You can have what we call allelopathic effect. That just means that it has chemicals in it that suppress weed seed. However, if we're putting corn out there, like in front of cereal rye, that can also suppress your corn if you don't know how to manage that. Generally, what we'll tell you to do is add a little extra nitrogen, get that corn off to an early start, and that generally helps with that. What else is a problem? Might use too much water. Some of these cover crops, a lot of times we wait and they'll dry out the soil, and especially in arid areas, that can be an issue. Generally in Ohio, where we have wet springs, we kind of like the idea of getting those cover crops to help dry that soil out. But in some areas, that's not beneficial. And where we see where most guys have a problem is they wait too long, and then it sucks all the moisture out, and then pretty soon we're getting into a hot, dry summer, and our crops then get a late start, and they're stunted. Okay, pests can sometimes be hard to control. You're going to see slugs, possibly, or voles. I will tell you that I have 5 fact sheets on how to control slugs, and another 5 on how to control voles. Voles are just those field mice that run around. Okay. But those can be issues. Generally, we have a lot of things that you can do, and once you start getting predators out there, a lot of times try not to overhunt the fox, the coyotes. A lot of the birds will eat a lot of these things. Okay, so there are ways to help with that. Cold, wet soils in the spring tend to be an issue, but when I hear somebody tell me they have cold, wet soils, I know instantly that they got a compaction problem. That's not the fault of the cover crops. Usually the cover crops will start to heal that soil, get that water soil drained. The water, it takes 10 times more energy to heat up cold water than it does air. That's why when we do tillage, every time we till the soil, we lose a 0.5 to 1 acre inch of water, so that warms your soil up. If you've been using the cover crops, you've got to get rid of your compaction, give it a couple years, and once that water starts to drain, your soils will be warmer. As that residue turns black, like this gentleman's coat, it will start to absorb the heat and that soil will warm up. And then later on, most of our veteran long-term no-tillers say their soils are warm and moist. Why is that? Because it's just like in the middle of a compost pile where you've got more microbes, you're going to have more biological heat. So it's usually a transition, and that can take 3 to 7 years. Okay? Herbicide carryover, that's one of the big issues that we're having. That can limit what cover crops you're going to plant and how long. You've really got to watch your herbicides so that they don't stay too long, because that can hurt your establishment. And then if you mess all these things up, it can decrease your yield. So it kind of defeats the purpose of those cover crops. But what we generally see on the positive side, well, let me just talk about this. This is one of the big things that happens, then we'll get to the positive things. So one of the things you're doing is every time you till that soil, you're putting oxygen into that soil, and you make the microbes go nuts. And what happens is you're putting the oxygen in, but you're forcing out the carbon dioxide. And unfortunately, that carbon dioxide is what we need for photosynthesis. Okay? So that's part of what's going on when we do the tillage. And then what do? We go from this macro aggregate, which most of you would, if you wanted to know what a macro aggregate looks like, look at black cottage cheese. Soil that looks like black cottage cheese. It crumbles. Okay? Well, once you get rid of put the oxygen in and the carbon dioxide goes out, you get a lot of microbes. They're eating all the glues in the soil, and pretty soon what happens to your soil? It turns into microaggregates, and microaggregates, just think of a brick wall. How many guys here, nobody I'm sure here has ever done this, but have you ever seen somebody just till the heck out of the soil till it's just powder? What happens when it rains? It turns to concrete, doesn't it? That's what's going on. We're going from a macro aggregate to a micro aggregate, you're turning it into concrete. Okay, that's the problem. Soil health, when we're doing the no-till and the cover crops, all those roots are adding your organic matter, they're healing your soil, you just got to give it a little time. Okay, and sometimes it doesn't take very long, but if you haven't done any no-till or cover crops, you've got better expect it might take just a couple years to fix some of those issues, okay? This is what I already talked about, those cold no-till soils, and we'll just skip that and go to the next one. Here's the benefits, and we're going to talk about all these in kind of this order. It stabilizes the soil, it reduces soil erosion, increases your nutrient efficiency. So generally what we're seeing, as you build that organic matter back into the soil, that's your storehouse for nutrients, okay? Also, you decrease other farm inputs over time. Usually your pesticides, once you get that soil healed, and you start to get back some of the biological life in the soil, you'll find out that you need less pesticides, less herbicides. Generally, those cover crops are competing with the weeds, but also you'll see maybe you don't even need as much fungicides or insecticides, okay? Because that plant is healthier. I could talk for a half hour on what happens with insects. They sense when a plant is not healthy, and they will attack it. Once your plant becomes more healthy, then they'll leave it alone because they cannot digest the proteins, okay? So that's part of what we're seeing there. I just use less labor and fuel. It will increase your soil carbon, and that has all kinds of impacts on aggregate stability and less compaction, okay? Higher water infiltration, you get less water and nutrient runoff, increased water storage, you get drought resistance, you get efficient use of your water, so you don't need as much. And then all these other things, improved drainage, improved water quality. We'll talk a little bit about nutrient density and how it can increase your yields over time. That we're talking about, all right? Here's the big one. I'm just gonna touch on this. We're not gonna spend a lot of time. Average soil erosion rates in the United States is 7.6 tons. To put that in perspective, if I had 50 bushel soybeans for every 1 pound of soybean that I produce, I'm losing 5 pounds of topsoil. That's not sustainable. That's the average over the whole United States, and that's an underestimate because it does not include gully erosion. It includes wind and rill erosion and sheet erosion, okay? Now, in Ohio, we're not quite that bad. We're a little flatter. We have 2.5 tons on average, but we're still losing 1.3, 1.2, 1 2/3, excuse me, 1 2/3 pound of topsoil for every 1 pound of soybeans that we produce. All right. Soil erosion. What does it cost you? This is I went to school at Ohio State, and so this is some of the economic analysis that we were taught to do. Let's just say average cropland is worth $10,000. Let's say half of that value is due to the soil productivity. And let's say there's about 500 tons of topsoil in the top 3 inches. So now we can put a value on that of about $10 a ton. And what we typically say at NRCS was the acceptable rate of erosion was 4 to 5 tons. I don't know, excuse me, but I don't know who the idiot was that came up with that, but that is way, way too high. We only regenerate soil at about 0.5 ton per acre per year. How does that happen? Freezing and thawing breaks up your rocks into sand, silt, and clay. Okay, so the T value ought to be 0.5, but if we're losing on average 4 to 5 ton, you take $10 times that, you're losing about 40 to 50 bucks. Just take the $10 times the average of 7.6, that's $76 per acre that you could be saving on average in the United States. Okay, so just a little bit on there. These are some numbers again from NRCS, probably the ones that are most interesting to you, and these are probably just a little bit dated, so you can probably increase that value by about 50%. $40 an acre of moss fertilizer. Down at the bottom here, total cost of soil and water lost annually at that time was $27 billion, probably just about 50% more, probably closer to $40 billion. Worldwide, the cost is somewhere around $400 billion. I would probably add about another $200 billion to that, about $600 in today's values. Okay. What about that rhizosphere and those microbes? One of the things we know is wherever we've got a live root, we will have 1,000 to 2,000 times more microbes. Why is that important to you guys as farmers? Each one of those microbes is a soluble bag of fertilizer. they process 90% of the energy in that soil, okay? So the more microbes you have in the soil, the more efficient your soil becomes, and they're putting that nutrient in the form that the plant wants. A lot of us think that's what fertilizer does, but fertilizer, the majority of that fertilizer goes through the microbes before it is fed to the plant. We would be better off, instead of fertilizing our corn and soybeans, we ought to be fertilizing our microbes, and we get probably better results, okay? Just something to think about, all right? This just gives you a rough idea of the difference between cropland, prairie, and forest. If you look at this, the cropland generally has just a little bit less, quite a bit less in some cases, but most of our cropland's dominated by bacteria, where what we really want to do is have that balance of both bacteria and good fungus. And the fungus that I'm talking about are these mycorrhizal fungi, okay? What they do is they infect a corn root, and they will go out anywhere from 6 to 18 inches, and they're like root extenders, and they're bringing back nutrients and water to that plant in exchange for sugar, okay? The second thing that they do is they improve your soil structure. So unfortunately, when you're always tilling the soil and you don't have a live plant out there year round, they tend to decrease. Now, certain species are very adaptable, but those are the ones that take a lot of carbon and they give us a lot less benefits. So we have almost 200 species of these mycorrhizal fungi out there. The very sensitive ones are the ones we want to try to cultivate. Those are the ones that really thrive under the no-till and cover crops, okay? But again, it takes a little while to get them established and to get them back into your soil, okay? That's what we're talking about. This just talks about some of the different communities there. This was the just looking at what's in the soil. There's all kinds of seeds, there's all kinds of debris, and it just gives you an idea of what a good soil, actually what it all has. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but just realize that these microbes really help us. How many guys here have a little bit of a problem with the residue hanging around too long? Just can't seem to get it to break down? Well, a couple reasons is because when we use a lot of insecticides, we're taking out some of the shredders up there, some of the mites and some of the springtails and things like that really start to break that corn residue down, okay? And if we allowed those to proliferate out there, ideally going into the spring, you should have 80% of your residue decomposed for that next year. If you still have residue from 2-3 years ago, you do not have very good soil health. You probably also, I can almost bet you've got a lot of compaction or poor soil structure in there, because we'll have a lot less microbes where the soil's compact. All right, so just some things that they do. These are some of the losses, some of the inefficiencies that we get when we have poor soil structure and compaction. The biggest reason that we cannot make no-till and cover crops work in most cases is because we're dealing with, hate to say it, the past sins, okay? And it's usually soil compaction and poor soil structure. You have poor soil structure, your volatilization on nitrogen can be 5 or 50%. You can leach 20 to 40% of that in a sandy soil. With denitrification on our heavy clay soils, we can lose 40 to 60% of our nitrogen. And with soil erosion, I hate to tell you, but the part that floats off is the organic matter, and that's where all of our nutrients are. So if you're losing a lot of topsoil, you're going to lose that. Just realize this, there's a lot of free nitrogen in the soil. Free living bacteria can gain us anywhere from 20. Typical soil can get about 20 pounds. If you have a very healthy soil, you can get up to 100 pounds of free nitrogen out of that soil from free living bacteria. And then legume cover crops can also do this. And I want to take just a little bit of a detour here. There is some new information out, just came out in the last couple of years. Anybody here ever hear of rhizophaging? 50% of our nitrogen we now know come from bacteria that the plant roots consume. That's probably the best way to put that. Root-eating bacteria is what they do. The bacteria live at the end of the root, and we found out that they get inside that root, and when they get inside the cell there, they go through like a washing machine. It strips off their cells, and all those cell walls are full of sugars and full of nitrogen. And what happens is they proliferate. Instead of having two, splitting in two, now they have four. So we can take like a straight rod bacteria, and all of a sudden they lose their cell wall, and now they're round. They just proliferate. They go crazy in there. And what happens to them? There are just tons and tons and tons of these microbes growing, and they start pushing on the cell walls, and what happens? They form root hairs. All root hairs are formed by bacteria. Okay? Something we just found out here in the last 4 or 5 years. So brand new information. Well, what happens? The root expels those, they put on a new cell wall, and then they start over the whole cycle again. It takes about 2 days. Now, about maybe 10% of them don't make it. Okay, maybe they're more than about 30 days is about the average life of a bacteria if it isn't eaten by something else. Those actually are beneficial to us because those are the ones that we get a few more nutrients, especially phytohormones. That just makes that plant go nuts. It just grows more roots, grows more shoots, puts on more yield. So it's actually a good thing if a few of them actually die within the plant. Okay, just new things that we're learning. All right. That makes this whole graph here a little bit obsolete. Almost every graph that I've seen that OSU Extension or any graph that is put out about the nitrogen cycle is really outdated anymore. We are even getting some nitrogen off the leaves, guys. There are bacteria that live on the leaves. And even to make this a little bit more interesting, it also impacts our water cycle. Guess what we just found out? Here within maybe 6 months ago. Okay, all this is brand new information. They come to find out that the drought in the 1930s lasted 4 years longer than it had to. Why was that? Because they tilled up all that grass out there. And what they find out is any living plant, go to the tropics, what happens every day? About 3 o'clock, somewhere between 3:30 and 4 o'clock, it starts to rain. Why? Because when you have evapotranspiration, there are microbes, over 69 species of microbes that go up into the atmosphere, they form the ice crystals, and they come down. Okay? Now, what impact does this have on agriculture? Well, if you don't have microbes in the soil, if you've got bare ground, guess what happens? All of a sudden, the moisture gets real big up in the atmosphere, the trade winds take it. Now, instead of getting a 1/2 inch or 1 inch rain, now I get 3, 4, 5, 7, 11-inch rains in one big downpour. Okay? So we are playing with the natural water cycle, we're playing with the natural nutrient cycles when we start messing this up. Brand new information just came out here within the last 6 months to a year. Going to have an impact on agriculture. Okay? Do we get more NMOS from inorganic fertilizer or organic? Just going to go cut to the bottom line. The organic N is better. It's about 73% more retention than where we have regular fertilizer. Okay, I know I'm going to run out of time, so I better just keep moving. The big thing you want to look at is that the line second from the N. How efficient is that nitrogen used? And if we look over here on the left-hand side, the second number there, you see the first column, 45, 90, and 180. Those are in pounds. All right? How much of that actually gets into the plant as a percentage of the total N that was put in there? About 33%. Okay? 38% if we put on 90 pounds at 180, we're going to get roughly 50. Where's the other 50% of the nitrogen that gets into corn come from? It comes from those free living bacteria, the rhizophagy that I was talking about. If we start adding too much fertilizer, pretty soon we're going to decrease the amount of natural fertilizer that we can get. So there's actually comes a point where it actually starts to hurt you if you put on too much nitrogen. Okay? That's what we're looking at there. We can also fight pests. And that's one of the things that these cover crops do. We lose on average about 30% of our crops every year, either from weeds or different pests. We're not going to be able to control them all, but what we're finding out is the guys that are doing no-till and cover crop and really focusing on soil health, they're starting to use the natural predators and just good crop growth to kind of outcompete the weeds, but also to take care of some of the predators that are out there. So, you can reduce weeds several different ways. Probably the best way, though, is just to outcompete them for sunlight. If you don't plant a cover crop, Mother Nature will fill that gap, and more likely it's going to be with the weed. And if you let that weed go to seed, that's going to become more and more competition. So these cover crops are really good at reducing the weeds that are out there. All right. Also, beneficial insects. We're finding out that soybean cyst nematodes. We start using cereal rye, annual rye. That's kind of a big one right now. If you use those, they can reduce the population anywhere from 80 to 90%. Now, in order for that to work, you've got to do it before the soil temperature gets below 50. You've got to plant them a little bit earlier. What it does is it pulls those cysts, and they come out of their cocoon. Once they go out of their cocoon, they can't come back. They can't tell the difference between annual ryegrass or cereal rye and a soybean plant. And so what happens is we'll see about an 80-90% reduction in soybean cysts. You have a lot of soybean cysts, plant some cover crops, get them planted early, put out an early soybean or early corn, get something planted out there early enough, you can greatly reduce your soybean cyst nematode. Also, we get these Carabidae beetles. That's that black beetle. And we get the fireflies. Those are really good for taking out slugs. They think slug eggs are like caviar to them, okay? So these things, if you have a lot of them out there, those are beneficial. In order to get more of those, you've really got to control your neonicotinoids, your cruiser, your gaucho, your pancha. Those things on your seeds tend to take out these Carabidae beetles, and then that starts to cause problems with the slugs. So you might have to look a little bit at what you're doing there. These mycorrhizal fungi, the AMF, they're really also good at helping with cyst nematode. They can offset the damage by 36%, okay? So that's one of the benefits there. We also, sometimes from putting out cover crops, most of our pollinators need to have a nectar source. And what they found out in Australia and Brazil is wherever they had some pollinators out there, their soybean yields increased anywhere from 10 to 40% in Australia and up to 50% in Brazil. What it does is soybeans are actually self-pollinating, but if you add a pollinator out there, you can actually increase your pod counts and you can get higher yields. So what they were seeing in Brazil is they were clearing all this ground, and they got their best yields within a short distance of where the old growth still was. Right next to that, there was a lot of pollinators coming out there, and that was increasing their soybean yields. Once they took those out and took them down, then their yields started dropping back to more normal levels. Okay, so it is possible to increase them. It also has an effect on diseases. Okay, it can better, mainly because once we get better drainage, we're not going to have all these anaerobic disease organisms out there. Also, if you've got a big, healthy population, they're always hungry and they're always eating each other. So you have a lot less disease. One of the problems we get in our soils when we have compaction is there's not enough predators out there to eat those disease organisms. So that kind of hurts what's going on. All right. These are all the diseases that, and some of these are quite. We've all heard of anthracnose, fusarium, pythium, Phytophthora, Rhizoctonia, verticulum wilt. Okay, your mycorrhizae fungi, when you get them very beneficial ones out there, they can protect you from all these diseases. Okay, I'm not going to say you're going to have 100% control, but you'll see that you'll have a lot less problem with these type of things. This is what it might benefit you. This is based on $13 soybeans. I could have updated it to today's prices, but that's pretty close. But, some of these diseases do cost quite a bit of money, okay? And there is a possibility that you can save that once you get those soils fixed. What about compaction? This is information from Dave Brandt's farm. We're seeing that it reduced soil compaction by greater than 40% where we had these daytime radish. One thing I will tell you do not plant over 2 pounds of radish. We had an issue up in Northwest Ohio about 10 years ago where guys were in this one watershed with Seneca County. They were planting very high rates of radish, and it led to huge water quality problems. Why was that? Because in that area, the radishes, they planted them early, they got real big, they turned to elephant snot as soon as the winter got real cold, and all that flushed out in the winter when the snow melted and the rains came and they got a huge flush. That's why we recommend 2 pounds, no more than 2 pounds. Always put a grass with it, and then once those start to die out, the grasses will suck up all those nutrients, and now water quality is not affected or actually probably improved once we have a really good, healthy system out there. So we've seen that those guys in Seneca County are really kind of leading a lot of the things that we're doing. They have really adapted no-till and cover crops, probably more than any county in the United States. Sometimes you got to learn through hard knocks, okay? But they're doing a good job. All right, this is what we see. This is from Dr. Seward Dykert. I have a lot of guys say, "Oh, I don't like the cover crops. I don't have that structural stability." But this was Dr. Seward Dykert. This is what he found. He took trucks on 4 different fields. One was subsoil. One had no-till for 1 year, one had no-till for 2 years, and the other one was a long-term no-till field. What did they find? Well, where it was subsoil, the ground was squishy when wet, hard when dry. The ruts were 6 to 12 inches deep. Just 1 year of no-till, what happened? Now the ruts are only half as deep, 3 to 6. 2 years of no-till, we're starting to get more structural stability into that soil. Half as much again. Ruts are only 1 to 2 inches deep. And then when we got to the long-term no-till, there weren't hardly any ruts, and this ground would be classified as firm when wet, soft when dry. What's the impact of that? Well, which one has more structural stability? The one in the upper left-hand corner. What impact did that have? This is what the guys from Maryland have been telling me because they've been no-tilling and cover crop now for probably 30 years. They say they can plant their crops 5 to 10 days earlier because they have this soil structurability. Okay, they have that soil stability, that structural stability. That's what we're looking at. They're not planting in mud. I can remember a couple years ago, I was planting corn, it started to rain, and I was just a little bit, it was a light rain. Everybody had to get out of the field. I was able to stay in and finish up because I had that structural stability. Now, I got in trouble one time. Came to the end of the row, and it was a little bare, and the mud was flying for a short distance until I got back where the cover crops was, and we were able to keep on going, okay? So it does help you, but you got to give it time. You got to get rid of that compaction, and it's going to take you a little bit of time to fix those problems. Soil compaction costs. This is some of Randall Reeder's data. Generally what we'll see is 200 bushel corn, you might get a 3% yield increase. That might be 6 bushel. I just used $5, that would be $30 an acre. On soybeans, it's much higher, 10% yield increase. 6 bushel on 60 bushel soybeans at $13, about $78, excuse me, an acre. These are your best cover crops if you want to fight compaction. It's really hard to go against the sorghum sudan. If you want to make the biggest change to your farm, sorghum sudan is a summer annual. It has to be planted after Memorial Day. Okay, generally it takes 100 pounds of nitrogen, but let it grow up, cut it off. You can harvest it, feed it to cattle, and you can harvest that several times that year. Every time you cut it off as high as you can, at least 6-8 inches high, so it'll grow back fast. You'll get 5 to 10 times more roots. You can raise your organic matter levels by 0.5% to as much as 0.75% in 1 year. Okay? Annual ryegrass has more roots than cereal rye, 50% more. So all these things are really good. They have fine roots. They break into that soil. I know the old dairy farmers used to tell me when they planted sorghum, they said when we would go to plow that in the fall, they He says that ground would just so mellow it would fall apart. Now I would tell you, don't plow it, just leave that alone, maybe plant another cover crop, and you can get the forage. There's no reason you can't make the forage off of it because 80% of your organic matter, 85, comes from the roots that are below ground. Okay? So go ahead and use those cover crops for forage. Brassicas are all pretty good. Well, I shouldn't say the brassicas, that's the best, is your Daikon. Those are the white radish, don't get the red ones. Turnips aren't all that good, they're too shallow rooted. When it comes to legumes, there's not that much difference, but there is some. If you want surface compaction, probably one of the best ones is buckwheat. Has very shallow roots. It will also, if you have low phosphorus, it will raise your phosphorus levels up. And then for deep compaction, go with the sunflowers. They have roots that go down really deep. Both the buckwheat and the sunflowers are excellent for pollinators. Okay, they really attract a lot of very beneficial insects. Okay, all right. What's the value of this organic matter? It's roughly about $1,200 for every 1% organic matter. That's based on today's fertilizer prices. Not going to go into it too much, but we're going to use this number. And how much nitrogen do I get from that soil organic matter? If I have 2%, that's 1,000 pounds of nitrogen for every 1% organic matter. If I get somewhere between 1 and 3%, so on a healthy soil, take 1% times 2,000, I get 20 pounds. Where did I get that number? It comes from the agronomy guide. Okay, it lines up perfectly. Now, if I have 4%, that's 4,000 pounds times, let's say, a little bit higher rate of return, 1.5%. Now I can get 60 pounds. And where we have really good, healthy soils, some of them are 6%, 2 to 2.5. You're looking at 120 to 150 pounds of nitrogen that's coming from those soils. How many of you guys have ever taken out a fence row? All right, you take out a fence row, you plant corn through it, across it, what happens? Corn's about this much taller, just yields to beat the band. What happens as you do tillage over the next 10, 15 years? All of a sudden the corn starts to shrink a little bit, okay? And pretty soon, after maybe 20 years, you still might be able to pick it out, but it's not nearly as noticeable as what it was that first year. Here's our goal with soil health. Let's make all of our ground like that fence row and bring that productivity up by using the no-till and cover crops rather than degrading, okay? And that's what our goal is, okay? So organic matter accumulation, how much can you add? Generally what you're looking at is, and I'm sorry, my changes did not come through. I saved all this and I'm using 660 here. And I changed that and I saved that 3 times. My computer's going on the blitz here. So, but if you take 10 tons of decomposed organic matter to equal 1% soil organic matter. Here's our problem. Most of our residue isn't decomposed. We lose 60 to 80%. I use in this example 75%. So we have to start off with 40 ton to get 10 ton of decomposed organic matter. If I'm using cereal rye, generally we will get somewhere between 4 to 6 tons of residue, and that equals about 1 to 1.5 ton, or about 0.1 to 0.15% soil organic matter. So what I'm going to do is, if you take that times 1,200, you're going to get anywhere from $120 to $180 for every year adding value to your soil. Okay. That 660 is a little off. It's supposed to be 1,200. I apologize for that. I can't control my computer. It has a mind of its own. All right. This is what happens with water infiltration. Now we're going to move to that. This is a Hoytville soil. And you know what? I saw the same thing yesterday. How many of you guys get what, 3/4 of an inch to an inch of rain? How much water did we have standing out there on these fields? We can't absorb an inch of rain. Okay, that's what's going on. So this was a rain event, 3/4 of an inch, less than a mile apart, 1/8 of a mile apart. And what did we see? On one side where we have good no-till, we've got pretty much water infiltration. On the right-hand side where it was rotationally tilled. No-till 1 year, strip till, or tilled the next, and you can see that the water's standing. I have slides from all over the country, folks. Kansas, Oklahoma, North Dakota that I could show you. We'll just show you one here. The key isn't how much rain falls, but what happens after it falls, okay? How much of it infiltrates your soils, and then how much of it can you store with that organic matter? And this slide kind of shows what happens with infiltration. If I do, and this is Ohio State information, if I plow it, I'm going to get 1/4 of an inch, okay? If I do no-till and it's bare, it's going to go down to 0.11, about 1/10. Why is that? Because that soil will start to erode a little bit and it'll clog the pore spaces, okay? That residue, if I add 40% residue, now I'm up to almost 0.5, 0.46 here. And what happens is it allows that, it absorbs that rainfall impact and it keeps those pores open. And then if I get up to 80% cover, I can do about 1 acre-inch per hour. I can tell you that Dave Brand, who's been doing this for about 30 years now, he has fields that will go 5, even 8 acre-inches of water, an 8-inch rain, and he can absorb that. I was on his fields after about a 3-inch rain. We did an NRCS training there. Everybody else was flooded, and the very next morning we were able to get on his fields and walk around without getting our boots wet, or muddy. I won't say wet, because everything was a little wet, but muddy. We didn't have the muddy. That really made an impression on most of the people there. What's the benefit of these? Where we have conventional tilled soils, you'll notice that water is dirty and muddy. Where we have no-till fields, it tends to be clear. There was some Coshocton work that was done, and over 40 years they had 1,400 inches of water run off a conventional field. The field right next to it is not this picture, it's a different site. This is the best I can come up with. They had a total of 7 where they had no-till. And most of that occurred within the first and second year, okay? First 1, 2, 3 years until that soil healed itself, all right? This is a benefit from water quality doing that. How much water can we store? I want to go to the bottom line and just look. If you had 5% organic matter, these are probably numbers that would be more typical. This is per foot of soil. If you take 2.5 acre-inches of water divided by 5, on average, a sandy soil can hold about a 1/2 acre-inch of water for every 1% organic matter out there. If you take the 4 divided by 5 on a silt dome, you're looking at 0.8. And if you take the 3 at the bottom divided by 5, that's about 0.6. So we're gaining a lot of water out there. And think about it, that's per foot of soil. If I had 3 feet of soil and 50% of that soil is pore space, you have the capability of holding a tremendous amount of water in that soil if you have the organic matter there to hold it. This is why it's so important. That residue on the top, what the organic matter does is it makes that soil cooler in the summer and a little bit warmer in the winter. All right, and what impact does that have on soil temperature? If the soil temperature is 75 degrees, for 200 bushel corn, you need 1 acre-inch of water. If it goes up 10 degrees to 85, you need 2 acre-inches of water. And if it goes up another 10 degrees to 95, now you need 4 acre-inches of water per week to get 200 bushel corn. What's 1 inch of water worth to you in yield? This comes from Dr. Elwood Taylor. And this is probably about 10 or 15 years old, so it might be a little higher than this. 8 bushels of corn, 3.5 bushels of soybeans, 6 bushel a week. Put a dollar figure on that, and that's pretty significant, okay, if you can start to keep those in. What about for drainage? What we're finding out is that these cover crops open the soil up and it makes it drain better. I remember Putnam County, a couple guys are saying, we love tiling those no-till fields with the cover crops. That plow just slides right through there. They use half as much power, they can do it twice as fast, okay? They look at it, and what we're finding out, in some cases, guys are wanting to go from, say, 50-foot spacings down to 25, okay, or splitting them. But we're finding out that you don't need to split your tile if you have good soil structure, because the water will move down and it'll also move horizontally to get to your tile, make your tile work better. So this is the kind of money that you can save if you start using the cover crop. You're gonna pay for that tile every 20 years, whether you have it or not, okay? Either you're gonna get less yield or you can get better yields if you have good soil structure. The cover crops will help make your existing tile just work that much better. All right, these are some numbers from Harold Waters. I would just take all these numbers and add about 50%. But on average, we're losing in 2016 about $30 worth of nitrogen. I would say it's probably closer to 45, maybe as much as $50 worth of nitrogen per field, per acre, okay, in lost nitrogen. Phosphorus is about $8.60. You take that and 50% increase, that's about $13 per acre in lost phosphorus, okay? That's what's going on. These are some of the benefits from the cover crops. This came out as some research. Now this research is a little old, I'll admit, it's back in the 2000s, but it probably still applies today. Reduced your nutrient and pesticide runoff by 50%, decreased soil erosion by 90%, reduces your pathogen load by 60%. We're not too far away here from the Blanchard River. That Blanchard River ever flood? Now I can tell you, having grown up in Ottawa, that yes, it does flood, okay? If you've ever seen 3 feet of water running down Main Street, you know that it floods. Well, one of the potential benefits of these cover crops is you add the soil organic matter, you get better water infiltration, it won't run off so quick, it won't be so flashy. Watch our ditches. They go up and they go down very quickly, and they're always dirty. There was a really good experiment that was done here about 4 or 5 years ago in Fort Wayne. 3-inch rain just came down, cats and dogs. 3 fields they looked at, and a couple ditches came together. 2 of the fields were conventional. The water was muddy, the river was high, the creek was really high. Right next to it was a no-till field with a cover crop. The ditch was half as deep that came into it, and the water coming off that field was crystal clear. And when it mixed with that muddy water, okay, it will take a lot longer for the water. You'll get the same volume of water coming off of it, but rather than coming off in 1 or 2 hours, it'll take 3-4 weeks, maybe, for it to actually get out of your soil. It can take a lot longer. Now, if you're worried about, hey, is there enough oxygen and that in the soil? Most of our roots, all we have to do is lower the water table a little bit, and those roots can do quite well there. And as that water goes down, now you're keeping that water in there for when it gets hot and dry. I wish I had a dime or a dollar for every time a farmer would walk into my farm as an extension educator and say, it's getting pretty hot and dry out there, we sure could use the rain. Didn't we just get an inch of rain last week? Yeah, but it's all gone, I need another inch. You know, how many times have I heard that? Have you heard that? I'm sure you have, okay? It happens quite often, all right? Oh, shoot. I was going to talk about nutrient density a little bit here. I see it did not save it. Let me just tell you this. Nutrient density is very important. We're finding out that our food is not as healthy as it used to be. You would have to eat twice as much meat. Let's see if I can remember this. 3 times as much fruit and 4 to 5 times more vegetables than what we did in 1940. Why is that? Because our micronutrient levels in our crops has gone down. Copper by 76%. Most of the other micronutrients have gone down anywhere from 24, some of them 15, 20%, okay? Our food is just not quite as healthy as what it was. I suspect it's due to the fact that we're doing more tillage. We don't have as many microbes there. When I go out and I look at nutrient deficiencies on corn and soybeans, I see it all the time. And I have a whole course that I do teaching on now what to look. Okay. We can also use these cover crops for forage, okay? And again, I updated this and I see, just add about 50% to the bottom line there. These did not, my saves did not take for some reason. But you can graze them and you can use them for forage, okay? I kind of like this one. I have. Can somebody tell me?
Yeah, about 10 minutes.
About 10 minutes. We're getting close to the end. I like this one because if you have manure This one's important. I used to be the extension educator in Mercer County, and I hate to say it, but once in a while I get into a few little tupples with EPA. I didn't really like the way they were regulating, still don't, but personal opinion. But here's the thing I said to them. Do you realize we had 60 million buffalo in this country, in the 1800s? Did those buffaloes stop eating or pooping in the wintertime? The answer is no. So let's learn a couple of lessons from the buffalo. Number one, apply your manure thin. And number two, apply it to a live crop. If we do that, it solves a lot of our water quality problems. Back in the 1990s, I looked at all the manure violations in the state and wrote a journal article on that. What did I learn from that? Anytime you put on more than 9,000 gallons, that's when you tend to see water quality problems. If you can keep it around 5,000 to 6,000 gallons, just do it, just drive faster, and you can wait a little while and put it on maybe a couple days or a couple weeks later and still put it out there. Here's the thing, guys. What's 5,000 gallons? 5,000 gallons is 2/10 inch of rain. If I apply 2/10 inch of rain to a cover crop that's that tall, is it going to run off? No, it's just going to make that cover crop grow like crazy. They do that in Pennsylvania, and they have some of the most lush and best cover crops. And I think, now, I'm not telling you to apply your manure in the winter. Okay, we can apply it in the fall, put it in the spring, apply it to a live crop, and you'll have the structural stability, and we won't have some of these water quality issues. Soil health improvement. It is a journey. It takes time to succeed. First thing you're going to see is that your carbon will come up at the surface. Second, you'll start to see better aggregation. Your soil will turn to black cottage cheese. The water will infiltrate, okay? Then you'll start to see that water and nutrient holding capacity will increase. And then you'll start to see that water and air quality improve. Unfortunately, the last thing you're going to see might be 4, 5, 6, 7 years, all of a sudden your yields will start coming up, okay? Generally, almost everybody that does no-till and cover crops will tell you the first thing that they see in their bottom line is that they're using less inputs. And then all of a sudden, they're not only using less inputs, but their yields are going up. That means their margins are getting wider, and that's more money in their pocket, okay? So that's what we're looking at. Last couple of things here. This was meta-analysis that was done. This was done a little while ago. The average was 21.5% yield increase. This was done by Bolero and that group. For legume cover crops, about 24%. This is the one that I like. This came out of Michigan State. It said every 1% soil organic matter that you add to your soil will increase your yield productivity by about 12%. So if I have 200 bushel corn, 60 bushel soybeans, if I add 12% to that at $13 beans, that's worth $94 an acre. If I do it on corn, it's about $120. If I break that down and assume that I'm only getting a tenth to a tenth and a half, you're going to be gaining, probably not going to be real noticeable, $9 to $14 on soybeans, $12 to $18 a year. It's small enough, but it just keeps adding up over time. That's what happens, okay? And this is where it really pays off, is in a drought. You can get 11 bushel more on corn. Soybeans about 5. In an average year, you'll get 7.8, almost 8 bushel on corn and 5 bushel on soybeans, okay? This is what we're looking for, okay? This is what Dave Brandt has done to his farm. If you go and look at the soil map on Dave's farm, Dave had them come out and evaluate his soil, and NRCS was just shaking their head. We don't understand this. This is the same soil type, believe it or not. This is what Dave inherited on the right. This is what he turned it into. He turned it into what we would call a mollisol, high in organic matter. They do not have a name for it, okay? He did that in about 20 to 30 years. Now I see here that we have a few guys here with maybe a little bit of gray hair like I'm getting, okay? But think about your sons, your daughters, your grandchildren. Wouldn't you like to be able to give them something that is much better than what you inherited, okay? And that's my last slide. Any questions? We might have, what, 2-3 minutes. I know that, they tell me I'm like the fire hose. It's very hard to drink very much of it because it's just full of information. I will tell you this, I do have cards here. I do soil testing and analysis for guys. I sell some crimper rollers. If you need some help, give me a call. I do charge $100 an hour, but I will tell you, I have guys from Oklahoma and different places, and most I've charged anybody yet has been $300, and that was a whole slew of soil tests. So I have it pretty well headed down where I can do it fairly quickly and give you a lot of good information that can help you.
That's good, Jim. Here, take one question right here.
Question, yes?
Any problem with carryover with the SCN on cover crop?
Doesn't seem to, well, here's the key thing. Usually the grasses doesn't affect them. It might have an effect on some of your legumes. But if you start putting the grasses out there, what we have found is you really need to try to get your crops off a little bit earlier. Most of us, I'll just put this plug out there, most of us are really putting out late maturing soybeans and corn. Dr. Peter Thomason has said there's no difference between early corn and late corn. I know some of you are gonna just about throw rocks at me, but here's the thing. If you plant them early, they will pollinate when there's adequate moisture, and they can yield just as good as the late maturing. That gives us a chance to take them off in September. You take them off in September, you can get premiums, and you're hauling less water to town, okay? So, and then that also gives you a chance to put out a cover crop. You get your cover crops planted in September, what'll happen is you can fool some of these insects, the soybean cyst nematode. They come out of their cocoons, they cannot go back in. You can knock out a bunch of them, but you about have to get those planted when the soil temperature is up there a little higher, and that will really help you on the soybean cyst nematode, okay? All right. Okay.
Jim's gonna be here on the panel after Cody Beacom, so come on up, Cody, as you get ready. I wanna mention that the Ohio No-Till Council has several sponsors, but two that have been with us a long time, I'm sure most of you contribute to it, is the Ohio Soybean Council and the Ohio Corn Marketing Program, part of the Ohio Corn and Wheat Association. So we appreciate that continuing support from those two fine organizations.